done talking about this.
Delighted.
So let's just start 10 years ago. What do you remember about that day?
Well, prior to that day, shortly after I was appointed superintendent, a veteran educator said, a veteran administrator said something to me. He said the most difficult decision you will make during your superintendency is when to close schools during inclement weather.
Did that turn out to be true?
Absolutely. And it resonated with me throughout my tenure, and especially prior to Slow Jam 2014.
Why are those decisions about whether to keep it open or stay closed, why are those decisions the hardest ones?
Not only do you impact 100,000 students, but tens of thousands of parents, employers, food service preparation. Everything you can imagine is impacted by that decision. And at that time, it was so difficult because in order to close the schools, you have to make that decision no later than 5:30 a.m. on school day. The reality I recall is that it's pitch black. You can't see the weather, and you're totally reliant on meteorologists, their reports, the Weather Service Bureau, and my guy Chesley. What can I say?
Of course.
Of course.
Of course. Everybody relies on Chesley.
Chesley is my guy. So that's the only information you have. The last update comes out a little bit after 12 midnight. So that between 12 midnight and 6 a.m., the information is sparse, and you have to rely on your local meteorologist.
How in the world do you make decisions when you really are relying on kind of an unknown and a changing condition?
Well, this particular incident, believe it or not, the Weather Service updated. There were advisories throughout the day, and then the last update was a warning. But that happened long after most people had gone to sleep.
So what did DeKalb County, when the entire rest of the metro got into the worst case scenario, how did DeKalb County get it right?
Well, it was a confluence of opportunities and resources. One was Dr. Fretwell. Believe it or not, he was one of the unsung heroes for DeKalb County, because on his own, he has created this practice where he stays up whenever there's the possibility of freezing rain and or precipitation. He travels the county throughout the night and monitors the situation. And on that particular night, not only was he up to see the last update from the Weather Service, but then he goes out to monitor bridges and streets to see if there's any precipitation. He was the one who alerted me to that final update where it transitioned from advisory to warning, that the possibility existed that we would have freezing precipitation and or snow on that particular day.
So how did you make your final decision, and what did DeKalb County do that day as you got that updated information?
Well, situational awareness is key. The critical decision we made was we called all the top administrators together in my conference room. And the forecast was that the possibility of ice and snow, but the last update was that it would occur probably between 3 and 4 p.m., but possibly as early as 1 p.m. And the question was, should we close the schools with the anticipation of the possibility of snow and or ice later that day? We knew that we could open the schools because it was clear. The question was, could we finish the school day before the weather arrived from the west? We made what turned out to be a critical decision, and I don't know how and where it came from, but I decided to, well, it's the buses and the bus drivers. Let me just say this. The key, other than Dr. Fretwell, our bus drivers saved the day. Those were the two real groups of individuals and or individuals who made the difference. Typically, buses, last stop, you drop the kids off in the morning. The bus drivers come off the clock. Many of them go back home. Some go and sit. Others may even have second jobs and then come back in the afternoon to pick the kids up to take them home. What we realized was that if snow and ice started falling at 1 or 2 p.m., there's no way we could get the buses back to the school building. Most of our drivers, 90+% of them, lived in South DeKalb. And it would have been impossible for them to drive from South DeKalb back to North DeKalb along the top end if there was icy streets and or snow. So the critical thing we did was, I asked the question, I'll never forget, my finance director said it would cost $42,000. We decided to keep the drivers on the clock, and I asked them to position themselves near their afternoon pickup. So after the morning drop-off, our bus drivers stayed on the clock and actually drove to the afternoon pickup and stayed there the entire day. So once we began to see snow and ice around 1 and 2 p.m. in the afternoon, our bus drivers were already at the location for the pickup. And that ultimately is what made the difference. We projected that the average driver would take about 40, 45 minutes to an hour to get back to school in the afternoon, which was too late. They were already there, picked the kids up, beat the snarl in the traffic, and were able to deliver the kids back to their homes safely.
Man, that's huge, because what do you remember about seeing on the roads and out your windows that day as pretty much every other district and business and government was letting out at the same time, trying to rush to either get home or to their families or their kids?
I just barely made it back to the central office on Mountain Industrial here in DeKalb. I was at a luncheon sponsored by Georgia Trend magazine where they honored the 100 most influential. And I asked Neely Young and Dan to call my name first. Because if you're Thurmond, you get called last, right? The T.
It's the alphabet.
Yeah, it's the alphabet. So they called me first that day and said, look, Mike needs to get back to DeKalb because there may be weather and he has to get his kids home. I'll never forget it. When I walked out of the luncheon, the streets and the ice and the traffic was snarled, almost stopped. And we barely made it back to the central office in DeKalb. We set up a command post there in the superintendent's conference room. I called in my regional superintendents, and we began immediately. We assigned the regional superintendents to their area to track the buses that were picking up and leaving, how many kids were still in each school. And we stayed there until about 10:30, 11:30 at night. Most of the people with me were not able to get home. They went to a hotel that was about a quarter of a mile from the central office and stayed at that hotel. And it was a hotel that had a pretty bad reputation. That was the other point about it. But it was the only one available for my regional superintendents. I often laugh about that now. But
A night they'll always remember.
yeah, that's a night they'll remember. The one thing they told me, we slept in our clothes. We did not take our clothes off. But that was the only hotel available. I lived about 3-4 miles from my office, and so I helped one of the police officers got me home. They couldn't make it home. It was just that bad. But we had to stay on the job in the command center until we got every child home and every bus accounted for. And so by that time, it was way too late for anyone to travel to any part of the county. But I'm so proud that they stayed with me and on the job and never walked away until it was completed.
As superintendent, the ultimate decision rests with you.
Absolutely.
Talk about how stressful it is to be the one to make that call.
Shortly after I was appointed, a veteran administrator came up to me and said, Mike, the most difficult decision you will make is when to close or not close school during periods of inclement weather. That is your toughest decision. And at that time, the protocols were not in place. And basically, you're on your own. And the thing I remember most is it's dark. We underestimate as human beings that how we use our eyesight to make determinations about weather, whether to take the umbrella, whether to put on a raincoat, is it going to be warm? But you have to make decisions at 5:30, no later than 6 a.m. prior to school starting, to set in motion the process, to cancel, and to notify parents, 100,000 students and tens of thousands of parents who then have to make some very serious child care decisions. You may be familiar. I don't know whether you have kids or not, right?
16-month-old.
Oh, wow, that's wonderful. You were pregnant the last time were you?
Probably.
Yeah. I think the last time you were here. But just think now, if all of a sudden the daycare or the babysitter is not available, what does that do to your day and your husband's day?
Oh, it throws it completely in chaos.
Total chaos. Mm-hmm. All right. Is that times 100,000? And then you have employers upset that you don't show up for work, but you can't show up for work because you have to provide care for your child. So it has ramifications that just ripple throughout the community, throughout the county, really throughout the region, because many parents work outside of DeKalb County. So it becomes a regional kind of impact. One of the things that after the debacle, and we weren't that smart. We were just blessed. I'll just be honest with you. I wish I could say that we were all smart and we were all thoughtful and we had this plan in place.
You just got lucky.
We got lucky and just understanding situational awareness, being aware. It was the fact that I was so inexperienced. I'd never served as a superintendent. And because I'd never served in a position like that, I think I was even more focused and intent on at least mitigating the possibility that I could get it wrong. And
you were hyper aware.
I was hyper aware with that advice, resonating in my mind that this will be the most difficult decision. Now, I had no idea that the snow jam was going to occur. It was just making sure I get it right this time and thinking about what can we do in an innovative way. The fact that we could open schools, but the challenge was, could we close them? Mm-hmm. We could get the kids to the schools, but could we get them home? And so we narrowed our focus to the afternoon and not the morning.
So then, maybe because of your experience and your position, the governor extended an invitation to you. Tell me about that invitation, what you joined, and the purpose of that role.
Well, I was honored that Governor Deal reached out and appointed me to the task force to review and analyze what had happened, what did we do right, where did we make mistakes, and more importantly, how we can work in a collaborative way to improve outcomes at the next weather event. And I was honored to serve along with, I think it was 2 other superintendents from around the state, as well as 3 meteorologists, and 1 who works with you, the legendary, to this day, Chesley. So we were there, and it was interesting that what we learned that I did not know. I think the governor, and obviously there was some media coverage that we only had 6 kids that we had to shelter in place out of 100,000. And those 6 were actually kids who wrote with their parents.
Wow.
Yeah, in the entire school district, we had 6 kids that we sheltered in place because their parents could not make it to the school to pick them up.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it really was. And I count my blessings. But it was back to fret rail, and we created a fret rail rule.
What is the Fretwell rule?
Well, number one person has to stay up to listen to the final weather service update. At least one person has to physically listen and to the last update. And if there's any changes, to communicate it to the rest of the senior executives at the school district. And he in particular will continue to monitor conditions on streets, roads, and bridges throughout the county during the overnight hour, so that in the morning when we meet at 5:30, 6 o'clock, we'll have a eyewitness update, the most current update to road conditions throughout the county.
And is the buses part of it still kind of part of the federal rule? Because that was such a critical decision back 10 years ago.
Oh yeah, well the transportation director is sitting there, gathering the information, and it's a collective decision. You don't sit in isolation. You have your team with you, and of course the director of transportation sits in that council, and you have to review the most current weather information. We're watching the meteorologists on the local stations. You monitor that as well. So the more information, the better decision you can make. And the updated information on that particular day was that we could open the schools. There was no problem with icing or any conditions on the road. The unknown was how soon or if weather would move in on the afternoon.
Which was rare for Georgia. Usually we get it overnight.
Yes, I think it was a once in a 100-year weather event, right? It never snows in the afternoon in Georgia. Just never happened. That's one of the things that came out during the task force as we did a historical analysis of weather patterns. Never happens. But the most critical part of it, even if it snows, the temperature on the streets and roads is above freezing. It has snowed, but it hasn't frozen. You didn't get the ice on the highway. The critical thing we learned, and you see it now, and every time I hear it, I smile, because when I'm listening to weather reports, whether it's 11 Alive or any of the stations, some of the meteorologists will now provide information on temperature, road temperatures. And I think the average person may not even pick it up, right? The key thing about what happened in 2014, we had Arctic cold the week before, and the temperatures had been extremely low for about 8 to 10 days. Similar to what we've had recently, right? And then we had the precipitation, which is why it froze so quickly and created such chaos on our streets, roads, and bridges. It was the temperature of the ground, particularly of the streets and roads, that made the difference. It wasn't the precipitation that fell, it was the streets, because that's what allowed it to freeze so quickly.
So now there's a whole network system
Yes.
that reports road temperatures that people can tap into and see.
That's key. That was the thing. That was my aha moment on the task force. Not the temperature of the air, and it's not necessarily how much precipitation falls from the sky. The question is, what's the temperature of the streets and the roads? Because that is the ultimate, most critical factor in terms of impacting road conditions. And so now we have this network that Governor Deal and his staff and the Georgia Department of Transportation put in place. And what's really cool to me is when I hear Chesley or somebody report road temperatures.
Directly because of that task force.
Of that task force. It's a huge step forward. The second thing that has happened is not just individual superintendents making a decision. Now GEMA will also provide information directly to superintendent, because there were potential weather events even after the snow jam. And we would receive notices and information through GEMA that allowed us to have even greater access and even more current information regarding weather conditions.
Sounds like communication really improved after that.
Absolutely. And you went from individual counties or superintendents making decisions to now you have the full force and effect of state level resources as well. And second thing that was very important, what's the difference between an advisory and a warning? Very few people had ever stopped to think about it. And so if you have no idea or concept of the severity or the increasing severity when you go from advisory to warning, you won't take the appropriate steps to prepare yourself in case of an emergency.
That's a great point.
Yeah, that was a big deal. I'm just telling you, that's a big deal. And every now and then I'll hear one of the meteorologists explain, and I would hope they would continue to do it more often because, it's not a, sometimes you got to keep re-educating the next generation, the new moms.
Totally.
Yeah, the new moms, that when you hear warning, you should take certain precautions and steps as opposed to advisory. Mm-hmm. And we toss the terms around as if 100% of the population know exactly what you're talking about, and you don't.
So how did that event in 2014, Snow Jam of 2014 and the task force, change the way school districts make decisions about whether to stay open or closed today?
And I've been away for 10 years, but I can remember how it changed, how we did it while I was there. And obviously it's more state resources available, i.e. information, to help you make the right decision, number one. You have better information. The key one is being road temperature, right? And just the knowledge that it can happen.
That memory is forever in people's minds.
Yes, and I notice even now, there's greater sensitivity and less willingness to take chances. So even if it's not an immediate threat, I notice our state leaders are much more aggressive in deploying the resources and the compounds on the roads and streets. So you learn from it. And that's the important thing. I think we learn sometimes through our mistakes. It's often the best teachers. And we've learned from this. And what I've seen over the next decade is greater awareness. We're much better in terms of preparedness and just overall knowledge about how we should respond. One of the things I think we need to understand is sheltering in place is not necessarily a bad thing. See, I remember, and just in preparation for this interview, I went back and just Googled the media, right? And the coverage suggested that sheltering in place was this huge failure, that you had these kids who spent the night at schools, right? We've had this other little crisis called a pandemic, where sheltering in place was the correct choice and the safest choice. So I think going forward, we won't be as, we won't see that in such a negative light, because under certain situations, it's better to shelter in place. It's safer.
I'm thinking the kids in a gym, at least they had light, they had heat, they had bathrooms, they potentially had food eventually.
Adult supervision.
Right.
That's the main. They had adult supervision and games and all of that. We had one parent among the 6 who spent the night, who walked, I guess, 3 miles to the school to be with his child. He couldn't get there by vehicle, right? So he walked just to spend the night with the child.
I understand that.
Yeah, that's you, right? You're like, what's unusual about that? That's exactly what he Yeah, that's exactly what I would do.
Put on 2 gloves and I'm going.
Hey, I'm going, 3 hours was no problem.
Right.
But that's the key. And sheltering in place is not necessarily a bad thing.
That's true.
Depending on condition.
Could have been the safest place for many of the
It
kids.
was the safest place for many of the kids. Obviously, the streets were not safe. So you always want to, and they're not home, and I can understand the anxiety and the angst that parents may have felt, but they were safer where they were.
Right.
In a pandemic, we sheltered in place for 2 years, basically.
Right, I know. Our whole mindset has shifted.
Has shifted.
Yeah.
And I think you've seen that. And so the key, I think, is situational awareness, being open to new information, and continuing to evolve and grow, and recognizing that, yes, Bad things do happen. That's okay. The real question is, how do you respond?
You're not the superintendent anymore, but you are in a position of power as the CEO of DeKalb County. What role do you play now? Obviously, you run the government, the day-to-day of DeKalb. Do you still work in conjunction with the school system, or how do you make decisions now in your current position?
That was such an important learning experience for me. It helped prepare me to lead county government during the COVID pandemic. It was another crisis, similar, where we had to determine working conditions, whether people would come to work. We had to shut down, work remotely. I mean, all of those things prepared me. And the key thing is and I went to I was a member of a class, political executive class at Harvard. And one of the classes is about situational awareness. That really helped me. Looking back on it, being aware, being open to new information, harvesting the information, analyzing, and then leveraging the information to mitigate the crisis. And see, some crises are immediate and others unfold over a period of time. And COVID obviously is a 3-year crisis.
Right.
That's still with us, right?
Right.
Snow jam was a crisis that evolved over several hours and days. And so you just had to be flexible in having that information, being able to inventory your asset. Dr. Fretwell was an asset. He had been doing this for years before I came to DeKalb County, right? And just realizing that his inquisitiveness and loyalty was an asset. And the fact that he was up, he heard that last update. See, that's one of the things that came out in the task force. The update came after most people had gone to sleep.
That is a big deal, because then nobody's getting the information.
Nobody's getting the information. And hopefully your story, that's one of the, it's like, oh, no, they told us, but everybody was asleep.
Right.
And
Doesn't
then,
do any good if you can't hear it.
if you can't hear it, and then when you wake up, you into the crisis.
Right.
It's on you. And then you have to make a decision. And then the thing that was so unique about 14 was there were no issues in the morning. There were no issues in the morning. It was beautiful and bright and clear and crisp. No problem in getting the kids to school. But could you get them home?
Most people, the answer to that was no.
No. It was no. And how do you mitigate that potential crisis? And that's why our bus drivers were so important. And I remember there was a debate. Can we afford to spend $40,000, to keep people on the clock? And the answer was yes.
Best $40,000 you ever spent?
That I ever spent. That was the best $40,000 I ever spent. And I celebrate and I still see my bus drivers today, and we always hug and laugh and smile because I made I always publicly celebrated them for saving the day in Snow Jam 2014.